We're just 2 hours away from the official announcement of Donald Trump's second Supreme Court nominee, a person whose future will then lie in the hands of the U.S. Senate. Earlier today, one of those senators, Elizabeth Warren, stopped by to discuss that battle and a slew of others ahead on her agenda. Senator, thanks for joining me.
Good to be here.
So you recently said that Donald Trump is not king, but he is president, and as his predecessor said, elections have consequences.
Sure.
So if tonight he picks someone who's knowledgeable and competent, why shouldn't he or she be confirmed?
So when I said he's not king, the point is the Senate votes. That's the Constitution. The Constitution says every single senator is going to get a vote on this, and if he can't get a majority, then he has to go back and try again. And what troubles me is when he announced immediately about Justice Kennedy's retirement, he said he was going to pick someone off a list that had been pre-screened by a right-wing extremist group that wants to overturn Roe versus Wade and settled law. So my view on this is the focus is, sure, hold Donald Trump accountable on this, but it moves to the Senate. Is the Senate really going to confirm?
But you mentioned Roe v. Wade.
Like
when people voted for him in November of 2016, they knew that he was a candidate who said, I hope to be able to appoint justices to repeal Roe v. Wade. I listened to the sound last week.
They also voted for senators who said, I will protect Roe v. Wade. The Constitution gives us both power in this, not just one.
I had a guest, Marjorie Egan and I had a guest on the radio last week, I can't remember who it was, who said that the best hope is for Elizabeth Warren to go to Maine and campaign in Maine for Susan Collins, your Republican colleague, to vote no. She's pro-choice. Would you consider doing something like that?
You know, I have to tell you, I would think about whatever it is that I thought might be helpful. Susan Collins has made clear her position on protecting Roe v. Wade, not just to me, but she's done that publicly. So I think this is going to be a critical moment.
Have you spoken to her, Senator Murkowski, since Kennedy stepped down?
Not about this. I've spoken to them, but not about this.
Speaking of judges, tomorrow was the original date by which a California judge said that the Health and Human Services, the Trump administration, had to reunite roughly 100 kids under 5-year-olds with their parents. You were just in southern Texas. Do you have any indication that they have either the ability or willingness to comply with that court order?
In fact, I think they went to court and said we're too incompetent to do that. And this is the part that really gets me about it, Jim. I was at the facility that was renamed from a detention center to a family reunification center. I met with these women who had been lied to when their children were taken away, who had no idea where their children were being held, and except for one, had not had any chance to speak to their children. And here's the thing, when I spoke to the director of the facility, this ICE agent who's in charge, he said, I don't have any plans to do that. I don't have any way to have children here. He said, if they're going to be reunited, that's going to be somebody else's problem, going to happen somewhere else. And that's what it's been like all the way through this. It's someone else's problem. We can't do this. This is obviously not a priority for the Trump administration, and they clearly don't have the competence to execute them.
Speaking of ICE, to borrow a phrase, you were one of the leaders for, can we call it repeal and replace ICE? Why? Why not just fix it?
Well, that's the point. How do you fix it? And how do you fix something that has a broken culture? How do you fix something that people on the outside see as creating more problems? You know, even ICE agents who are working on terrorism investigations have said, man, something needs to change big within ICE, because ICE has become sort of the focus of taking families apart. And let's be clear, not just taking families apart at the border, taking families apart right here in Massachusetts. That can't be how our immigration system works.
But if that criterion is what you use to say that ICE should be disassembled and then reassembled, couldn't the same point be made about the Environmental Protection Agency? That should be repealed? I'm serious. I mean, doesn't it have the same problems that ICE has under the former director, Scott Pruitt?
I don't see it the same. I see the problem over at the Environmental Protection Agency is you've got a lot of people who want to do the right thing. It's a leadership that says, no, we're not going to do this. I don't think there's any problem over at the EPA under Gina McCarthy. It's that now with Scott Pruitt, and no longer Scott Pruitt, now with a coal lobbyist in charge, they're trying to use the mechanisms of the EPA not to protect us so that we can breathe the air and drink the water, but trying to use it to open up to industry to dump whatever they want into the air and water.
The other night, Donald Trump did his Pocahontas routine again, and critics have said this was a twofer. It was not just racist, but misogynistic. Is he a racist? Is he a misogynist?
Oh, come on. He's principally a bully, and he'll use anything that he thinks is going to make him big and tough and manly and roll over everybody else. You know, I know what he's trying to do. He's trying to bully me, and he's trying to bully women all across this country.
Why do so many women then, at least in November, and they knew most of what they now know about Donald Trump, particularly women without college educations, why did they vote for Donald Trump in such significant numbers?
I don't know.
Is there any reason to think that's changed?
I don't know. I don't have any way to know that. But I'll tell you this. There are a lot of women who on the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated put on the biggest protest rally in the history of the world. And remember, it wasn't put together by fancy protest rally organizers. It was put together by women on Facebook and on email and texting. And they built this incredible movement and raised their voices. And here's the thing, Jim. Once people stand up, once people decide, I'm going to be in this fight, I'm going to be part of this, they're not going to sit down and shut up.
Do you, getting back to the president for a second, his routine the other night was if I debate Elizabeth Warren in the race for the presidency, I'm going to hand her one of those genetic testing things and challenge her. But of course, in the era of Me Too, I have to do it gently. I know you said to the Globe you thought this whole thing was a distraction. Why not just do it and get it off the table?
Right. Why not just give in to a bully and get it off the table? Because it's not how you deal with
Barack Obama gave in to a bully when he released his... Did he give in?
How many years later?
No, I'm serious. Did he not give in to a bully based on that notion when he released his Hawaiian birth certificate?
You know, I don't think so. He had already, at that point, I think, it was much, much later, and he did it on his own terms. And I thought that made a lot of sense. That was fine.
So, in the last few minutes, he's a misogynist, he's a racist, he's a bully. Speaking of Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, the line of maybe this century, when they go low, we go high. You've chosen to stay low with Donald Trump. When he's called you names and called people names, you've done the same thing back.
Actually, I disagree with that, Jim.
How so?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've gone low. I've called out a bully for bullying. I haven't called him names. I haven't made jokes about size of anything. I haven't, come on, that hasn't been the way I've gone after it. What I've done is tried to talk about the issues that Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about. He doesn't want to talk right now about families being torn apart at the border and his incompetence, his administration's incompetence for putting them back together. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that his Supreme Court nominee comes off a list that has been pre-screened by a bunch of right-wing extremists. He does not want to talk about the fact that his EPA administrator has just resigned on, what was it, scandal number 28, or were we at 29? Which one was it? He doesn't want to talk about the fact he promised to fix NAFTA, and it's a complete disaster. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he promised he was going to do a great infrastructure project, and there's nothing there. He doesn't want to talk about the fact that he promised he was going to do a big, beautiful health care program that was going to be better than anything anybody had, and it was going to be cheaper. And what have they done? Nothing. In fact, he doesn't want to talk about the fact that right now his administration is working so that insurance companies can discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. If you think that's going low, to talk about those issues and to talk about them over and over and over when Donald Trump wants to make jokes, wants to go somewhere else, then I just don't see it that way.
Did you read the Andrew Sullivan piece about how the dismantlement, if that's a word, of the Obama legacy is even worse than most people think? No. The reason I bring that up, I think about you from time to time, and I think about you mostly about what does she do when she goes home at night, like Cambridge, I'm talking about, not that charged environment. And on some days I say, she's got to feel defeated because of that list you just described. And on the other hand, then sometimes I say to myself, on the other hand, she's got the President of the United States who is obsessed with her. I think that's a fair statement. What are you when you go home? I'm serious. When you close the door and you get a release from this for even a few minutes, what are you?
So it's two parts. One is, I am so glad to be in the fight instead of on the sidelines, because this is terrible. And Donald Trump would be doing this stuff whether I'm in the Senate or not. I am so grateful to be able to be in a place where I can fight and fight for what I believe in. And the second part, we just got a new puppy.
But you haven't named it yet, from what I understand.
Oh, we have.
You're going to tell us what it is?
Yeah, Bailey.
Based on?
George Bailey.
Oh.
It's a Wonderful Life, a community banker.
Pretty good.
Come on, I always thought that part was originally written for a golden retriever. A good heart.
My mother dated Jimmy Stewart one night. Don't ask any questions. I'll leave it there. Someday I'll tell you the rest of the story. Just one night. You know, speaking of places you've been, you were in Iraq around July 4th.
Yep.
Around Easter, you were in the demilitarized zone, North and South Korea. After Secretary of State Pompeo was in North Korea the other day, the statement of the North Koreans was, this is a gangster-like demand for denuclearization. But isn't that what the American people want, a demand for denuclearization?
Yes.
So what's the problem?
The problem is what the American people really want is denuclearization. They actually want us to be effective. And this has been the problem from the beginning. We need diplomacy to make this happen. I mean, you've really got to sit down and work something out. That takes a full diplomatic team, people who know the language and the economics and the history and the politics and what's important to Kim Jong-un. It's a painstaking process. It's not just a photo op. It's not just theater and declare the world is now safe and leave. It's hard, hard work to make that happen. We in America, people around the world, want to see North Korea get rid of its nuclear weapons. But the only way that's going to happen is with a lot of smart work on our side and on the side of our allies, South Korea and Japan, and on the rest of the world, pressure from the rest of the world. Diplomacy, particularly with North Korea, is not something the United States can just demand and make happen on its own. The way you really get a dictator to the negotiating table is just like we did in Iran. All of the countries work together, and that takes a lot of work on our part. All the countries get together, they bring enough pressure to bear, and then they make it clear that the cost-benefit analysis, drop those nuclear weapons, and there will be real benefits for the country.
So, you know what I'm not going to ask you?
Yeah.
Because I don't have enough time to. I'm not going to ask you for running for president. I'm going to ask you fine. What I am going to ask you is, why wouldn't a person who cares as much about the issues as you do, who's a decent, patriotic leader, why wouldn't they consider running for president if you see the threat to this country as great as you clearly do under a president, or even worse, I guess you'd think, under a re-elected President Trump? Why not?
It's 2018, Jim, and the fights we have in front of us right now, we're within hours of the president announcing who he wants to put up for the United States Supreme Court. We do have families that are still torn apart in a Trump administration going into court saying we're too incompetent to be able to fix this problem. There's another case proceeding that would take away protection for people with pre-existing conditions. We are in so many fights right this minute that we've got to stop playing the game of 2020, 2024, 2028. We've really got to focus on the fights in front of us and an election. I'm up for re-election here in Massachusetts, 2018. We are less than 4 months away from that election. We got to stay focused here. This is what matters. This is what's in front of us. You were just talking about the piece you read about all the
Andrew
things
Sullivan thing.
that the Trump administration has dismantled. All these people running these agencies who are just running them, just turning them into perversions of themselves. A Department of Education that's out there to help the for-profit colleges cheat more young people. An Environmental Protection Agency that's out there to let polluters do more damage. Every piece of that. We got our hands full right now, and we've got to stay focused on both the fights in front of us at this moment, but also on that 2018 election. We can't act like this is just the small election. This is the one right now that's in front of us that matters. This is our chance to get Democrats back in control of the House and the Senate.
Say hi to Bailey.
Will do.
Nice to see you, Senator.
Good to see
Thanks
you.
so much for your time.